change in the, oh, great. So yeah, setting the context, how did we get here? So just to set the scene, the Philippines is the #1 country most at risk, that's a typo, from the climate crisis. And basically, you can see here, this is from the index, this was in 2019. So they identified that like natural hazards were like typhoons, hurricanes, volcanoes, floods, etc. Yeah, this is just another diagram that demonstrates this is from Kalakasan, an environmental organization in the Philippines. This is the 10 countries most affected by climate disasters from 1998 to 2017, and the Philippines ranks #5. So you can see here, this is like the total losses in, yeah, the total losses in economics, in deaths, and then this is like the risk score that I was showing you earlier. So yeah, so basically the Philippines is a very resource-rich country. It's rich in gold, it's rich in coal, has amazing biodiversity, coconuts, mangoes, fields, like literally like people are sleeping on the Philippines when it comes to natural resources. It's not viewed as like the place where you could find like, you know, the most exotic birds in the world, but it is the epicenter for a lot of biodiversity that has been like untapped and unresearched. I could do a whole presentation on that, but I highly recommend you looking up just like about Philippines biodiversity, especially for like butterflies, fish, birds, etc. There's some really beautiful ecosystems that exist in the Philippines. So what makes the Philippines so vulnerable? So there's socioeconomic factors such as significant economic inequality. They have a desire for economic development, so that means that they might prioritize things like mining for coal or like minerals over like caring about the environment because they want to advance the country because they are deemed being in the global south and having such high economic deprivation. There's also education inequality, also as a result of income inequality, and there's also unequal resource allocation and agency for vulnerable frontline communities. So there is like a really big indigenous resistance movement in the Philippines, but a lot of that has been suppressed by the government because it has been labeled as like a socialist movement that's going to attack government resources. Also could do a whole presentation on that, but it's pretty complicated. But just suffice to say that a lot of the ways in which resources are allocated specifically to indigenous peoples and marginalized groups in the Philippines is very politicized based on people's access to wealth and power in the country. Geographically, the Philippines is very vulnerable because it's located in the Pacific Ring of Fire, which is basically like where tectonic plates meet, and so it's very prone to like volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, floods, etc. because of that. And then yeah, they also have high exposure to natural hazards such as cyclones, landslides, floods, and droughts. And they're also dependent on very climate sensitive natural resources. And a lot of communities that are in the Philippines live on coastlines. And so a lot of fisher communities are very vulnerable depending on, you know, typhoons or different natural disasters that could totally destroy their entire income and well-being. Building off of that, for like the socioeconomic climate on why the Philippines is so vulnerable is that the Philippines is very rich in natural resources, but the people are very poor. So a big issue with like the Philippine economy is that like a lot of the people that are working on the front lines, growing a lot of the crops, making a lot of the goods, a lot of those goods end up getting exported to other countries like the US, the UK, other parts of Asia. And not a lot of that wealth that would have come from all those natural resources are invested back into the communities that produce them in the first place. So this is just a little bit more on what's driving the socioeconomic climate of the Philippines. So there's a concentration of wealth and power at the top. And a lot of these are like landowners, people who have a lot of wealth and power and have for many generations. And they're usually considered a part of the bourgeoisie in the Philippines. And basically, they concentrate all the wealth and power in their resources because they own most of the corporations and the industries. So a lot of the people at the bottom who actually produce a lot of these goods, which are typically workers, indigenous peoples, etc., are left poor and powerless to make a lot of change in their society. Another big driving factor to the socioeconomic climate in the Philippines is bureaucratic capitalism. So this forces neoliberal policies that exploit land and people. And basically that's a fancy way of saying that there's like a lot of companies that have like, global headquarters who like made a stake in the Philippines because of like its resource-rich nature and its labor force, and basically have become a force. Like it's not like, oh, they're just like this separate company that you work for. Like you'll see billboards for these companies all over the Philippines, how they've benefited, communities across the country. They're like embedded in the society that these are the biggest employers and like fuel the development of the Philippine economy. So kind of whatever their agenda is, whether they're a coal company or whether they want to mine in a certain part of the Philippines, like those companies have the most agency over that because of that reason. And then another big driving force is imperialism. So imperialism, it influences politics and governing in the country in the interest of foreign powers like the US. So that's just another thing to state, is that there's a lot of different air bases for the US and other countries, like foreign countries, but specifically the US in the Philippines. And they have a really big stronghold over like the politics and the economy in the Philippines because of that. And I think that's a really important point to drive home, is that because of that reason, US imperialism and the influence it has on the Philippines directly means that Filipino Americans have a direct responsibility and obligation to addressing that power dynamic, because, our political system is indirectly and directly affecting Philippine politics. Another important part is just to talk about what makes the climate vulnerable in the Philippines. So you can see in this diagram, this is that different parts of the Philippines are exposed to different types of climate disasters. So you can see towards the north, it's more like sea level rise, and there's like different areas, but there's like sea level rise, there's extreme heating. When it says disturbed water budget, that's like how water is allocated to the community. So you can take a second and just look at that diagram. And this is just to show you that like there's hundreds of islands in the Philippines. It's literally a melting pot. And the geography in every different part of the country is going to require a different climate response. It's going to be this blanketed, like the Philippines is going to put out a climate plan. Like, no, every island and every local municipality or barangay, like down to the barangay, needs to like actually establish a climate resilience plan. And the way that that can actually get done depends on the national body being able to like push that agenda forward and encouraging local governments to actually create climate resilience plans. But it's going to look different for every place. So now that I've set the scene on what makes the Philippines vulnerable socioeconomic wise and also geographically, I want to talk about some of the issues in the Philippines right now. So the first one is illegal mining. That's like mining of mineral resources, of coal specifically is a really big issue. Also illegal logging and deforestation of the land. And as we're hearing about things like COVID, like logging and deforestation, and in order to just like produce like monocrops or to produce plants, etc., is just going to make us more vulnerable to future diseases and pandemics. Then there's also evictions and displacements of local people. Again, a lot of people in the Philippines, especially indigenous people, land to make way for fossil fuel production. And they're actually being given like agreements, like bribes, or threats even, to convince them to leave their land in order to do this. And the last two big ones are destruction of coral reefs. That's also due to like deep sea drilling and mining. There's a lot of conflicts with like China on that, because China wants to, do a lot of drilling in the Philippines, and that's going to damage a lot of coral reefs. And the last thing is biodiversity loss. Again, this comes with deforestation and all these other things. And then another big part of this is just industrialization, the impact on Philippine ancestral lands. So specifically, destructive mining, extraction, and land grabs are impacting indigenous peoples' lands and sovereignty. So as I brought up at the beginning of this presentation, my family's from Mindanao, and Mindanao currently is considered the last frontier for just like mineral extraction, because it's just been an untapped resource. Like, the forests are still fresh, the rivers are still intact, and now it's being viewed as like the mining capital of Asia. And basically, indigenous leaders are being murdered in the process of trying to defend their land. This is just an example, a case study of like how a community in the Philippines is impacted by all these driving forces I just brought up. So that's Mindanao. So an example of this is that, we have the top exports from Mindanao. That's bananas, coconuts, nickel, fish, fruits. And a lot of the places that they are exporting this to are the US, Japan, Korea, China, and the Netherlands. And in exchange for this, instead of them getting access to those natural resources, they're instead getting oil, wheat, milk, and mineral and chemical fertilizers for their agriculture. And this is just to give you a display that like these issues aren't just black and white. A lot of like communities in the Philippines benefit from getting imports of things like oil, getting imports of like things for mechanized agriculture. So they benefit from these things, and due to all those driving forces I told you before is why like they've been led into this situation where they like need to import these things and not depend on the resources that they're exporting. So it's like it's like a push and pull constantly to make that resource sharing happen. And this is just to drive the point more home. So you can see the relationship between the U.S. Military presence in the Philippines and just like some of like the overlap of how like different military groups have been deployed in Mindanao in the southern Philippines. And that's in areas that are very mineral rich and biodiversity rich. And this situationer, it says LUMAD situationer, is basically just to explain that like while there's a lot of militarization threatening the Philippines, there's also a lot of resources extraction and threatening of indigenous lands at the same time. So I just wanted to draw that parallel, that those things are not like separate, they're one and the same, and that like those driving forces have to be considered, because basically a lot of indigenous people or people on the ground in communities in Mindanao, will push for wanting a fair distribution of resources, but then they're accused of being like a communist, accused of being a part of like the radical group opposing the government, and their lives are being threatened in the process. So what's at stake? Social inequality is the underlying problem beneath the present COVID-19 health crisis and the longstanding problem of climate change. I just want to bring that point to say that like the driving factors that are making communities in the Philippines vulnerable right now to both COVID and climate change are one and the same. And I think that framing it that way and thinking about who's vulnerable is really important in this moment. And I had an interview with this woman who you'll get to hear from later in this presentation, who's a part of Nuclear Free Bataan. And she explained to me that, in the Philippines right now, a lot of the stimulus packages are getting like sacks of rice right now. And basically she explained to me that a lot of like the fisher folk or like frontline communities that are in her community that are currently being threatened by this coal power plant are being given like payouts or offers by the coal power plant to tell these people, hey, if you take this payment, you can leave your land so we can expand our facility. And when you lose your livelihood and your job and have nothing else to survive off of course you're going to take that offer unless like, you know, if you need to. And I think that we have to think about like people's sovereignty over their land, but also their need for like economic subsistence, and that like those things are very complicated when it comes to the Philippines. This is a picture that I took with the Lumad children that I did work with. Very powerful, and just like we're talking a lot about just how they were being threatened by different military forces and troops and told that like they couldn't get an education because their families were a part of this communist resistance. So they ended up having to be evacuated from their school, from their families, and are continuously threatened to be killed by these groups that don't want them to have control over their land. So this goes into a darker part, is that the Philippines is considered the deadliest country for environmental land activists. 2 in every 10 deaths that Global Witness, which is the group that created this information, watchdog group reported last year, took place in the Philippines. And yeah, environmental defenders that we currently even know of course a lot of this hasn't even been kept a record of, but mining-related extrajudicial killings under the Duterte administration as of January 2018, there's 30 across the Philippines and 20 specifically in Mindanao. And there's so many stories of incredible environmental activists who have been killed for defending their land or fighting a coal power plant. And I just wanted to like present the reality that the Philippines is the most who I just learned about was Gloria Capitan. So she was an environmental activist. She was one of the leaders of the coal-free Bataan movement. And she opposed coal mining and the construction of stockpile facilities in her community. And she received a lot of intimidation while she was protesting. And inevitably in 2016, due to the corruption and due to a lot of the violence around environmental protesters, she was killed by unidentified assailants. So I play this video. Will. This is from my friend from Nuclear Free Band for 2 minutes about Gloria Capitan.
Hi again. So I'm going to share about who is Gloria Capitan, or who was Gloria Capitan to us in the coal-free Bataan movement. She was a colleague, and she was gunned down by 2 unidentified assassins at her small karaoke bar in Barangay Lucanin, Mariveles, Bataan. So Ate Gloria was a very helpful leader and a colleague, and even selfless at some point. She lived a modest life with her family, and yet would oftentimes spend her own resources or money for our shared advocacies. She had rejected bribery several times. In fact, she was very angry about it because she said, she believed that the struggle or the campaign is not an opportunity for personal gain, but it is a collective action to achieve the greater good for the whole organization and for the community. But I think prior to her death, she was a key leader of the community. She was the key link to the community that's an open coal stockpile was operating at the time. And she led the campaign through the petition signature against the pollution caused by the open coal stockpile. This is the reason why we believe that the cost of Ate Gloria's death was the campaign to shut down, to close down the open coal stockpile operating at the heart of their village.
So that is the video from my friend Derek from Coal Free Bataan. And as you can see, she reflects a lot on how big of an influence Gloria Capitan was on the community and the efforts to really push forward environmental justice in her community. And she didn't start off as an environmental activist, as Derek noted. She started off as someone who owned a business and just cared about her community and her family, and was killed for it. And I think that we have to remember that environmental activists, especially in the Philippines and abroad, they're not necessarily these heroic figures you put on a pedestal in the media. They may be your family member who just wants a better life for their kids. And I think that sometimes we forget that, we forget our connections to these stories. So I'm glad I got to share the story of Gloria Capitan with you all today. So go to the next one. So another important part of what's at stake is lessons from Typhoon Haiyan. Communicating and storytelling can save lives. So a big part of Typhoon Haiyan and why it was a really big disaster was that a lot of the information was not properly communicated to people in local municipalities who could have avoided disaster. So there was a lot of issues around basically it was considered it's called Pagasa, is like their weather monitoring system. They knew about Typhoon Haiyan, they knew what was gonna happen. And basically they broadcast it across national television, etc. But it was not as properly distributed in local television sets. And even when it was communicated on local television sets there, the way it was described was as a storm surge. They're like, storm surge, you need to evacuate. But basically no one there, or a majority of people there, didn't really know what a storm surge meant. They didn't have language around it. There wasn't education about what that meant, why they need to evacuate sooner rather than later. So they underestimated the risk. And so basically there's a lot of research now that came out after Typhoon Haiyan that basically indicated that if those people got a proper warning signal, actually learned the proper language around how climate change or this climate disaster was going to impact their lives, that maybe more lives wouldn't have been lost. Because over 6,000 people died in Typhoon Haiyan in Tacloban, and a lot of the communities were just devastated and destroyed. And there's a lot of grief on just what the government or state officials could have done better to prevent that. And I think I just want to set the context that in our communities, especially in the Filipino diaspora, storytelling can save lives. It's not a matter of just connecting people. It can literally be the difference between their survival or their death. And similar to the people I shared about earlier, the indigenous peoples that are being impacted by mining and extraction, telling their story can also be the difference of life and death for them too. And so I just wanted to set the context that what's at stake for talking about the story of climate change and vulnerability in the Philippines is the difference of helping communities at a large scale, even if we don't live in the Philippines right now. I would love in the chat box, if people want to participate, if you can write in the chat box, what do you think makes it difficult to talk about climate change in the Filipino community? If people want to write in the chat box, that'd be great. Some suggestions that I have right now is one, colonial mentality. If you don't know what colonial mentality is, that's basically feeling internal shame for being Filipino, viewing the people that are poor in the Philippines are struggling as less than you, viewing that you made it because you're in America, you don't really care about the Philippines anymore. Another point is the American dream. Again, that just like couples with colonial mentality. Like, I need to focus on my own struggle. Like, I can't care about the Philippines. Another thing is just like Manila-centric notions around how resources are allocated. So a big thing in the Philippines that a lot of my friends or colleagues, activists talk about is that a lot of the resources that are shared in the Philippines, especially when it comes to healthcare or disaster response, is very focused in Manila, and the rest of the country doesn't really get that same kind of support unless you live in like a wealthy family or community. And so that's another big issue why climate change is difficult to talk about, because even in the Philippines, there's a discrepancy on around who has access to talk about climate change and the environment and who doesn't. And then if you're a Filipino American, that just gets like scaled up tenfold because you're double disconnected from the realities of what people on the ground are facing there. And the last thing is this very much, you know, Filipino being resilient mentality. Like, let's not talk about our vulnerabilities. Let's not talk about our mental health or what we're struggling through, because that makes us weak and we're a resilient people. Yes, I think the pictures of seeing, oh, let me see. Someone can mute their mic. So yeah, yeah, basically the last thing is like, you know, you see these funny pictures of people in the Philippines, like still doing the job in a typhoon. And yes, I've laughed at those pictures, but it's like, at the same time, like, that's terrible that like we're not building the infrastructure necessary to like alleviate that or mitigate that. And I think that that's what we need to talk about. So did folks write in the chat box? I can't see if you did.
We've got some things right now. Angelica,
Cool.
that there's competing priorities. Like I'm interpreting that as communities can't center their conversations around climate change because of more important things like finances and family obligations. So Angelica's written that. Yeah, I'll keep reading them out as people go down.
Cool. Yeah, if anyone else has any other thoughts on it, please write it in the chat box. But yeah, I think from Mike's perspective, like the colonial mentality has been like the biggest driving force on why it's so hard to talk about these things. And I think that's why I really wanted to create this space today for us to start talking about these things, because there's not a lot of language around this. And I think that a lot of environmentalism is framed not by people who look like us and not by Filipinos. And so I'm really excited for us to take ownership of this conversation today and like actually come away with really great stuff. And yeah, I love this next statement. I pulled up the chat box. I'm fancy on Zoom now. Okay, so the next statement was a lack of general knowledge about climate change and how it affects the community. People don't know about it and then continue not to talk about it in a feedback loop. Totally agree with that. I think there's a lack of just like education. Even if your family's like, oh yeah, climate change, I really care about that, that's an issue, but it's like, oh, but we don't actually know what that's going to mean for our finances, for sending money back home, etc. Like, there needs to be more of an embedded language there. Oh, I love this next one. I find difficulty talking to my parents about the work I do because they have a lived experience and understand the effects of climate change firsthand, but don't make the connection of capitalism, imperialism, or colonialism, or believe that it has a huge influence on the climate. I think that's a really good point too. I think that, yeah, that's definitely really hard. Next one was Filipino Americans face their own struggles as immigrants and Americans in America, and it can be difficult to talk about issues beyond one's own community. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And okay, last one. I agree with the colonial mentality and overall reluctance to be disruptive and challenge Western institutions. Yeah, I think all of these coupled together are all real experiences that I'm sure everyone on this call has experienced. And it's really important we start breaking that down. So now I'm really excited to just talk about international solidarity. And this is before we get into our breakout rooms. So international solidarity. Solidarity is a verb. It's not just a one-time action. It needs to be continuous and intentional. So these pictures I took, this is when I was working with the Lumad in Mindanao in the southern Philippines. my whole job there was just basically to do on-the-ground journalism, to interview Lumad children and leaders about their experiences of being impacted by climate change in Mindanao. And I learned a lot, and could go into that whole report another time. But basically, ever since then, after that experience, I realized I wanted to continue engaging with the Philippines, not just do a one-time immersion trip, but to continue figuring out what organization or people both in the Philippines and here in the US are trying to resolve these issues, trying to bridge the gap around the conversation. And yeah, I just wanted to give some tips on ways to embrace international solidarity. These are some tips that I've embraced in the past few years since doing this work. So one big part is donating to international frontline organizations, especially those run by Indigenous peoples of the Philippines. A lot of those people aren't getting nonprofit help. They're not 501c3s. They're doing a lot of like radical on the ground work and don't have a lot of funding. A lot of them are volunteer led. So definitely donating money to either NGOs who support those organizations or directly those organizations is important. The second one is thinking about co-creating content, designing zines, live webinars, podcasts, or infographics together. Again, this is about building long-term intentional relationships, and especially when we're in quarantine, like this could be the perfect time that you could think about how you can build a storytelling moment for you and people who live in the Philippines. Next statement that I've learned from a lot of people I've worked with on the ground in the Philippines is that they really just want people to share the stories of frontline organizers to continue to push the urgency and struggle of climate justice worldwide. They just keep saying, like, a lot of their stories get denied by the government. They're getting killed and the numbers are getting fudged. But if we had Americans, especially Phil Ams, continuing to push that story, like, people are going to notice. People are not going to forget about it and not forget that's happening. Focus organizations such as FACES, which I'm going to have Adrian talk about in a second, Anak Bayan, Kabataan Alliance, Gabriela, and ICHIRP, the International Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines. I also list out a bunch at the end of the presentation, but those are some examples. And build meaningful relationships. This is me with some of my friends who, this is back in January. They are activists, climate activists in the Philippines, and are involved with FACES indirectly. And yeah, I have had a lot of fun making like really deep friendships with Filipinos abroad. Like I said before, people's organizations, especially Indigenous people's organizations, are volunteer-led, usually run by grassroots volunteers, and are focused a lot on poverty and Indigenous sovereignty. So really trying to focus on how you can donate and support to them is important. And yeah, I'll let Adrian talk for a minute about FACES before we head into our breakout groups.
Thanks, Christy. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adrian Salazar, and I am on the board of FACES, the Filipino American Coalition for Environmental Solidarity, with Christy, and I'm glad to be able to share with you all. Thank you, Christy, for this opportunity. I think you shared a lot of great information, Christy. Thank you for setting the context, and some of it is going to reflect on what FACES work, what we do is. I just wonder, I'll just spend a little bit of time doing this. Maybe if folks need a stretch break, we can do just like a quick stretch before I talk. And if you are off camera, maybe you want to go on camera so we can all stretch together. And stand right now. So I'll just guide us in a little stretch break real quickly. So you can reach your hands up to the sky, stand tall like a mountain, feel your length. Now stretch out to the sides, feel your width, open your arms, feel your community. standing beside you. And if you have space, you can stretch down to the ground. Try to touch your toes. Feel your rootedness in the earth. When you're ready, you can come back up and take a breath. Okay. So thanks, everyone. I'll just dive right in and want to share just a little bit about our organization very quickly so that we can dive into the discussion. I'll also just say that I'm really happy to be here because I'm an alumni of PASS, and just to reveal a little bit about my journey, I came into advocacy, social justice work through the Filipino organizations at Cal. And I was there, Aliyah, when the first advocacy coordinator started at PASS. So I'm really glad that y'all are still doing this really great work. So FACES is an organization based in the Bay Area. It's an environmental justice organization, and it is now almost 20 years old. And what we do is we work with partners in the Philippines and in the Bay Area, and particularly do a lot of this international solidarity work that Christy is talking about. The organization started 20 years ago in a campaign to clean up former US military bases in the Philippines, which are some of the most polluted sites in the Philippines, because the US military is one of the largest polluters in the world. And so you can see already some of the themes that Christy was talking about, like US imperialism, actually are very much overlapping with environmental justice issues, pollution, climate justice. So we worked on a campaign to call for the US government to clean up its former military bases in the Philippines for several years. And then we also started a campaign to call for the cleanup of and better operation practices of Chevron Corporation, because Chevron is based in the Bay Area. You have the Richmond oil refinery right there in the backyard of Berkeley, and its headquarters is in San Ramon. Chevron also has operations all over the world. You know, the oil industry is like an octopus. It has its fingers everywhere. In the Philippines, it had, as well, including extracting oil, it had oil depots where it was storing oil in the middle of Manila. And you can stay on the first slide, Christy, I'll tell you when to change. And so we were calling for, with a partner in Manila, the cleanup of these oil depots where people were living right next to them on the border of their houses. And now our current campaigns are working with partners in the climate justice movement in the Philippines. We work with the Philippines Movement for Climate Justice, and there's a picture of some of us standing with them when they visited California a couple, actually 2 years ago, or last year. And the Philippines Movement for Climate Justice is a network of grassroots organizations, people's organizations that try to fight on a very wide range of issues, including local fights for indigenous rights, for farmers and fisher folks, and for cleaning up of toxic sites and kicking coal, polluting industry like coal out of the Philippines and out of people's communities. And we also do work with local allies like the Filipino Advocates for Justice. You can go to the next slide, Christy. So the Filipino Advocates for Justice is based in the Bay Area as well. Here's a beautiful picture of the family in the Filipino Advocates for Justice, FAJ community. They have a very strong youth engagement program, and we worked with FAJ to build a community garden in Union City. You can see the start of the community garden there, and youth volunteers helping to plant our crops. And so part of the work that we do is helping young people as well as our own community members and our family understand our relationships to the environment and to our traditions in food knowledge, in relating to nature that are part of our culture. And so we use garden-based education and environmental justice education to advocate and get people active in the campaigns that the more like political campaigns that we are moving. You can go to the next slide, Christy. So the Filipino American Coalition for Environmental Solidarity, FACES, is a really strong model of international solidarity, what Christy is talking about. We work really in service of the partners that we work with. So for example, with the Philippines Movement for Climate Justice, they have a big campaign to shut down coal power plants in the Philippines and to stop the development of more coal in the Philippines. And so we have been trying to work with them to figure out what are some ways that we can support that campaign, in addition to supporting their needs through climate crisis. They do a lot of work with their members when things like Typhoon Haiyan swept through, and you know the typhoon season is every year in the Philippines. So unfortunately, you can anticipate these things coming through. And so we try to figure out ways to send aid that will go directly to communities that are in most need. And then we work in solidarity, and we build engagement in campaigns here in the US, in the Bay Area. We work with, we're developing a set of campaign actions around the utility justice campaign in the Bay Area, which is calling for the PG&E utility to be reformed because they've been responsible for a lot of the wildfires and the shutoffs that you might know of last year. And the last thing I'll say is these beautiful pictures here of folks with putting together meals and sharing a lot of our traditional knowledge and culture, is that a lot of this work is done in community and rooted in our cultural traditions, so that we recognize that the concept of our relationship to the environment and our resources is part of our tradition that we inherit from our ancestors, and that we have deep pools of wisdom to draw from. So that's a little bit about FACES and the work that Christy and I do together in that organization.
Thank you, Adrienne. Awesome. Well, I will come back to Mitzi later. You will see her soon. So we're gonna do the breakout groups because that's like the bulk of what we're gonna be doing the rest of this workshop. So basically these are the breakout groups you can join. So we're gonna correspond like 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So please write in the chat box right now which one of these breakout groups you wanna be a part of. Like as soon as possible, so that way we can like get everyone into breakout rooms. Yeah, and these are basically the topics. And when we come back, we're all gonna like get like the key points from each group. But yeah. So people can write in the chat box which one you want to be in. Oh yeah, I can put it back up. Hold on.
Okay, yeah, this will just take me a minute. I'm just finishing up here. I've sorted everybody out into their respective rooms, and so I will just begin those. I'm just gonna double check. Yeah, I've sorted everybody out. Adrian, did you have any preference, or did you write that in? I didn't see anything.
Adrian's part of the environmental campaigns discussion.
Is that two or two? Yeah.
3.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think I've got everybody sorted in. So yeah, all right, cool. I'll just start those now. That this works. Okay. Hello. Oh, hi, Joel.
Okay, maybe we'll see what's going on. Hello.
Oh, where'd you go?
Hello. I am just kidding.
Oh, there she is.
Hello, hello, community. So
Hello.
just to clarify, can someone tell me which workshop or which room this is? This is room 2, right? So I forget which subject.
Oh, yeah.
I see no chat room.
Wait,
that-
what chat room is this? I thought it was 2.
Yeah, it is 2.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Okay, it's like hard to hear. Let me turn up my volume. Sorry.
Cool. Is this Filipinos and the climate crisis?
Mhm.
Okay, great. I didn't want to accidentally put myself on the wrong one, but hello, I'm going to be your discussion facilitator today.
Okay, cool.
So a larger thing about the Identity Environment Workshop series is that we want to build toolkits as well as strategies for how we can integrate these strategies and these facts that Christy and Adrian have told us about into programming that we can apply in any capacity of our lives. May it be personal, professional, or anything that you see fit. So we're just going to kind of discuss like various questions that have been written out for us, and just kind of discuss upon like how we can see this application in the future. So my first question for y'all is, how do you personally relate to the climate crisis and environmental issues? And in your own words, can you define what environmentalism means to you, and if you have any struggles right now with defining what that means?
I will say I do struggle at times at defining environmentalism, but I think my definition of it would be along the lines of like not only advocating for like the health of the planet, but also people. And I think that's where it ties in for me, like why I care about the environment. It's like not just about like the health of the earth itself, but like actual people who are going to be heavily impacted by the climate crisis.
So I'm sorry, I don't really know how to define environmentalism just because it's not really something I've like really studied in like both in high school and also like in my like higher education. But I guess like me defining it would just be uh making conscious decisions, as much like whether it's in like our daily like personal lives, but also like within our own like whatever track or whatever career that we choose, like being conscious of like of the resources that we use, and like both in making sure that we don't like hog resources from people who do need it, and also making sure that whatever resources that we take, it doesn't negatively impact the planet. With in regards to like the issues that people are currently facing, or what I'm currently facing, I'm not really that well knowledge as well. But it's kind of also the reason why like I joined this one, this like the Zoom meeting just so like I can learn more, especially in the context of like my Filipino American identity, but also like for people back in the Philippines, and then also I want to like learn how I can like be conscious, especially when I'm going into something like when I'm going into bioengineering, how like when I get into like these big like companies, if once I start working with them, how do I like be more conscious with like resources and like making sure that I like keep in mind of like the resources that I'm like that my company would be like hogging, but also like be taking from like the planet.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing. I think that you like everybody brought up such interesting points that like all intersect with one another. Like for example, Megan, you said that I don't think about environmentalism as just being about the natural resources. I think about it as being about the people, which is like textbook definition of environmental justice and what it stands for. So yeah, and Kuya JR, you brought up you know, resource management as well as how we can optimize in order to ensure that the impact that we're having on the planet is minimized or not there at all in a detrimental way. So it's so interesting to hear these things coming from like different points of view and such, because they ultimately tie into it's all about the people as well, as opposed to like coming into this. And like as you were saying, which really resonated with me was like the way people consider the environment, which is, you know, like the Sierra Club, like John Muir way of considering the environment, which is kind of like admittingly, you know, wealthy Caucasian people defining for us what the environment means and how to preserve it, which is so exclusive of people and the idea of proper management. So like that was really cool. I also just struggle with in defining environmentalism because it's like it's so wide ranging and so encapsulating. But like, yo, this is cool. With that, I just wanted to ask y'all, what do you want to feel more of, or what do you want to see more when it comes to bridging the current gap between the Filipinx community as you experience it and the climate crisis, or the ways in which we discuss it as a community?
First thing that came to my mind was to see people just care more, like not just in the Filipinx community, but just like in general. I don't know, I personally I don't have too many friends or like know too many people who share like the same enthusiasm that I have for environmental issues. So yeah, just being able to connect more with people on that matter.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you have right there about social groups. Yeah, Jared, did you want to build on that?
I really do resonate with that, mostly because like I also like most of my like the people that I like are friends with, like we don't, let me actually word that correctly, because like since I'm like I have like separate groups of friends, and like most of my friends are like not really into like environmentalism or like really care about like the overall environment. And I guess what I would want to like what would like to come from out of this is like how we can relate like environmentalism into like different like tracks of like careers or like life, because like I think that's why a lot of like people are they're not really like into like I guess environmentalism, because we don't like, I don't, some people don't see how it would like relate to them, or like I guess like obviously it does, because we all live under like the same planet, and we're all like, you know, we all have, like some of us have like access to resources that other people don't, but like we just like I guess a lot of us don't know how we could like volunteer or like help out with a cause if we don't know how our career can like somehow like be connected with that.
Yeah, I think that it's like so interesting how it's brought up how, you know, I personally invest myself in learning more about the community as well as these environmental issues, but the thing is that like my peers either don't have the capacity or like have not had these conversations with themselves yet. And it brings us back to like what Christy was talking about with things like colonial mentality or the way that we were brought up, arguably so, to even just consider ourselves as like working towards the goal of obtaining like some type of career in some professional field without like considering things like advocacy and climate mitigation strategies and anything like that. So yeah, I highly resonate with that as well. Even like working in like a academic field that focuses on environmentalism or environmental studies, it's so difficult to find a peer who can intersect that with environmental justice, because of all of these things, especially within my like current collegiate Filipinx community, in which these things are kind of brought up as like side niche type of subjects, as opposed to something that we can arguably implement into programming, which leads me to my next question. I just wanted to see, like, as a group, if we can use this as like a brainstorming space in order to discuss ways in which Filipinx people or anybody in general, as we brought up, like the general public, could bring the climate conversation to their family parties, their dinner tables, or to their peers at school or work. Yeah, I want to open it up to y'all.
Sorry, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just thinking we could use this space right now to like brainstorm some ways we can bring the climate conversation back to our own communities. May they be like Filipinx identifying or no. Yeah, I just wanted to hear what y'all think about that.
Probably like starting with my closest friends and seeing like their knowledge of like what they know about the environment, and just like gauge really, I don't know, just like how in tune they are with it or not. I don't, like, that would be a good starting point. And like you could extend that to anyone really, just like starting that discussion. But I'm not sure like what other outlets you could like to do that.
No, yeah, that's a great point that you're bringing up. Like starting the conversation first and like navigating how you want to talk about that personally, but with people that you trust and you can properly communicate with, as like test trials. I think that's a really good
idea.
I definitely do have some friends unintentionally, but that's a great idea. Yeah. What else? I think personally with family, like contextualize, my parents are both like, they both emigrated to the United States when they were already adults. So like they have that lived experience that Christy was talking about earlier about like, you know, they see these environmental issues happening, but they can't like disconnect themselves from, you know, the empire with the capital E, like this capitalist system that predicates itself upon this like meritocracy and stuff like that. So that's like a potential issue that I think would bring up. But I think then you have to like find a way to have that conversation without like devaluing the work that they've done to elevate themselves out of whatever situation they were previously in, as well as like talk about imperialism without like the academic jargon in order to like meet people on whatever level they're on. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, because I was like, what problems do I run into?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like I totally forget the whole disconnect if you try to use the jargon that you're talking about.
Do you have anything that you're stewing in the head right now?
I don't really know what to say, just because like I kind of fall in that like in the area of like I don't know much about it, and like a lot of things. So like most of my information like about resources and like the environment, it's mostly because of like I'm friends with people like Joe or like you, and most of my information comes from them, from you two. But when it comes to like my family, I like, because my parents also immigrated here, but I haven't had the conversation with them about like how it was back back there in the Philippines for them, in terms of like, yeah, in terms of the environment. So like maybe I guess for me it would be like talking with them and seeing like what they know and what like their perspectives and their like narratives were. But other than that, like I kind of like I have a hard time of like having that conversation because I don't have like a base knowledge to like really go off of, you know.
I think then for like folks like you, Queer JR, who are like interested, but you know, admit that like, you know, I'm not the most knowledgeable person on this. And this goes into the next question as well, talking about international solidarity and like what that looks like beyond just like donating monetarily. How do we like show up for the community and with for others that live within like the archipelago and who live within the diaspora? Because it's like conversations don't just have to be like us espousing what we've learned onto others. It's also like showing up and like connecting in the long term. So like, what does this international solidarity like mean to you, and how do you think you can integrate that into how you want to experience environmental justice and talk to people about it?
Maybe for me, not like first thing is what I probably do is like reach out to my relatives, but like I don't think that I have to like dive into like the whole environmental aspect, but to show solidarity, like checking in on how they're doing and trying to see if I can support them in any way. And then from there, what I would probably do is like look into those groups that Christy were talking about to see other resources of how I could show solidarity from afar. Because like I think that's one of the biggest things I'm struggling with right now is because I'm in America. How do I show solidarity from like afar?
Really great point. But yeah, you make a great point in terms of like international solidarity starts with like the relationships you already have and like talking about the intimacy there and introducing them to them.
I don't think I have much to add because like it will probably be the same thing because I've talked to like my cousins in the Philippines, and they've told me like of some of like the things that they've been going through, but I think I just had to like I have the information and like they've told me like their own narrative, but from there I don't know where to I don't know where to go after that. You know, what will be the next step of like showing my solidarity, you know, I could like they can keep telling me like their stories and I could like tell them, you know, I'm here for you, but like all I can say besides saying, you know, besides like maybe like donating, but I want to know how else I can like step, you know, how I can what would be the next step to like giving my support and being showing solidarity.
We are being beckoned back to the main session, but yeah, I just wanted to thank y'all for having this conversation. Like it's always so interesting to hear people's responses to things, and like y'all have given me such insight. So grateful for y'all, and thank you for coming today. So yeah,
nice talking to y'all.
Y'all, and I'll see you in 2 seconds in the main room.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yes. Oh, hi Ryan.
Hello.
This is Ryan from the Perennial.
Yes. You'll see a story by the end of the semester. It's still developing.
Okay, thanks Ryan. Okay, we're coming back.
Great. Cool.
I think
so. Everyone's back.
Yeah, everybody's back.
Okay, cool. So maybe we'll just take like a minute for people to like from the different groups to share. So I'll go first. I was in the mental health group with Ryan. It was really fun. something that we just identified is that like you should figure out not to force yourself to do certain things. Like listen to yourself. Do you want to like chat with friends? Do you want to connect, or do you want solitude? Do you want to take that time for yourself? Like sorting that out and being really honest with yourself. And that in terms of like listening to like the pressure from your family, it just comes down to like setting your own boundaries, and that like the benefit of having things like social media and your own support networks is identifying those and just like making time for that every day. And the last thing is just I would love for all of you to try to commit to one self-care practice that you do every single day, something short. Like I wouldn't say do a long thing because you're probably not going to realistically do that every day, but something for 5 minutes that you can actually commit to every day is my takeaway. So yeah, I'll pass it to the food and the environment group for a report back for a minute.
Yeah, we just talked about like food and our relationship with food, and we're also like questioning the importance of food and cultural food like within our lives and within our communities. And I think the general consensus is that like personal cultural appreciation of food is a part of like self-love and like building community, but it doesn't necessarily like replace advocacy and doing work in like community building. So it's a good like step in the right direction, but it shouldn't stop there.
Cool. And Adrian?
Charlie will report.
Yeah, we started off with me telling Adrian that I've been following him for a while on Twitter. So I'm like, wow, this is so cool. And just we started with the second question of what campaigns are we doing. So I kind of talked about the work that I was doing. I'm here in Chicago, and pretty much like it's kind of isolated, but trying to find solidarity with other, environmental justice groups and kind of supporting those efforts. I work on a group called the Chicago Asian Americans for Environmental Justice, so kind of building up that network of Asian Americans who care about those issues, and kind of tying to the theme of like, how do we get people to really understand that environmental issues affect all of us, and we should plug into those and really think about how that really plays into our lives despite, what our professions are. And it tied to the first question that Adrian asked for me of, are Filipinos leaders in the environmental movement? And like, yes, like Filipinos are leaders in the movement. Are they recognized as such? It's hard. I think they should be, but maybe they are not. Internationally, Adrian was talking about the presence of that, and I think building those connections. Then we kind of spewed into like just learning more about the work that we're doing, how we got into the environmental field. And I think that really builds true to building environmental campaigns, is really getting to know who's doing what and kind of making those connections. I don't know, Adrian, if there's anything that I missed.
That was perfect.
Awesome. And then we'll have the identity and climate crisis group talk.
Ooh, Megan or JR, do you want to speak on this? I want to open up, I don't want to take up too much space from y'all if you wanted to give a little summary to the group. No Kui JR? Okay. Megan?
Yeah, sure, I'll add a little bit. We were basically trying to define together what environmentalism means, and like the whole gist is, well, like what we came to it was like not just like advocating for land, but also for people, And then we were, towards the end of our discussion, we were talking about how we can show solidarity, cannot say that word, internationally. And what we came down to was, just like connecting, building the personal relationships to the people in our lives that we have, our like relatives that we have in the Philippines. And then we were gonna go further in on like how else to show solidarity besides like joining orgs and stuff, but then we're back to the main group, so yeah.
Amazing. I love that. And yeah, I mean, international solidarity and how to create that is a way longer conversation than this workshop. It's an ongoing process that we have to keep sorting out and meeting with each other about. And that's that solidarity is a verb. So don't let this conversation die here. Like, continue to have these conversations offline, well, online. Can't do offline. Whatever. You get what I mean. So anyways, I'm gonna play this video from my friend Mitzi. She's part of the Youth Action Coalition for Action in the Philippines. I don't remember, it's a really long acronym, but I'm gonna play her video because she shares her thoughts from youth from the Philippines, and she made this video for you all. We'll click view. Wait, present. I hope this works. Okay. Oh. It's loading. Let me see. It might just like that. Let's see. Okay. I think it's just. Okay.
Hi, I'm Mitzi.
Okay. That's gonna work. Okay, there you go.
Hi, I'm Mitzi from Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines. The Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries to the climate crisis. According to the latest Global Climate Index, we're the second most vulnerable country. Yet our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions are so minimal, less than 0.4%. This is why Filipinos especially have to call for climate justice. We have to hold carbon majors like multinational companies and global north. The Philippines have the chance to develop and begin their just transition towards an environmentally sustainable society. We have to pressure our local leaders, calls of the Philippine people, especially the marginalized sector, national climate negotiation, new coal-fired power plants.
So yeah, that was amazing work in the Philippines. Oh, I guess I should stop sharing my screen because I have more stuff to share. Yeah, I should definitely check them out. But the last thing is just, these are some organizations you can support and learn from. There's Kabataan Alliance, who actually for a lot of the stuff I talked about today. Nuclear Free Bataan movement in the Philippines, Mitzi's organizations, SACA, FACES, and the Philippine Movement for Climate Justice. There's a bunch of other ones. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation. I've stayed for like 2 hours. I'm honestly shook right now. I really appreciate it. But yeah, if you want to reach out to me, you can contact me on that presentation. I'm Brown Girl Green on social media, and you can reach out to me. I love having these conversations, and I definitely want to do another training like this in the future. So thank you all. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just a second, folks, if it's okay, in terms of metrics and stuff, I'm going to be sending out a Google form for this workshop. This is going to be part of an ongoing series in order to identify and flesh out the different intersections and relationships that different marginalized communities have with the environment and environmental justice. And we want to make this an ongoing series for the different communities, and so your feedback would be very much appreciated. So yeah, thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much, Chrissy, for facilitating, as well as Adrian for the plug about FACES and FAJ. Very large fan of both. So yeah, thank you all so much. Okay. Right up.
Thanks, everybody.